Good evening, everyone. Hello, my name is Anne Renee Reeser, and I am a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending tonight's presentation. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. We attend regular meetings, assist in events like this, and plan an SAB-sponsored program every semester. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you as well. If you enjoy tonight's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. If you prefer to write us a note, there will be note cards and pens on the table as you exit the building. Your attendance and feedback help shape future programming. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we will have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. And now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Barbara Ballard.
Very much. I thank you, and I will say welcome this evening to Foodscapes, Urban Agriculture, Sustainable Design, and Community Health. I have just one housekeeping detail to cover. If anyone brought in their plates or their glasses, make sure you take them back when you leave to the room so somebody doesn't fall on them and they break, okay? So I have done my one good housekeeping duty. We're delighted that you are here this evening, and I hope you will look on the back of your program to notice that we have two programs. So if you've not been here before, you would be interested in it. If you've been here before, certainly you know what our programs are like. But on April the 4th at 7:30 p.m., we will have Senator George Mitchell. For those of you who may not know who former Senator George Mitchell is, he was a former Senate Majority Leader and is an exemplary public servant with an impressive political career, and he served with Senator Dole in the Senate and was the founder of the Bipartisan Policy Center. I think you will find him very inspiring and one of those people that kind of understand what people need and how we should develop policy around those needs. Also, on April 11th, we have Citizen Journalism in Arab Spring with Andy Carbon. And Andy Carbon of National Public Radio will be interviewed about the use of social media in Arab Spring, a revolutionary wave of demonstrations and protests occurring in the Arab world since late 2010. We're very honored this evening to have three outstanding guests that Bill Lacey, director of the Dole Institute, will be interviewing. I'm sure many of you have heard a lot about Greensburg, Kansas, and how that town was totally destroyed. And they're rebuilding, and they're very proud that they're mostly green. And that is probably what many cities or towns should strive for, but not under the conditions that Greensburg end up doing theirs as well. We know a lot about healthier living, how important fresh food is, especially in inner city and rural areas where they're not able to get fresh food as easily as perhaps we do in a more urban setting. I also was thinking when I looked at this program about West Junior High, which is now West Middle School here in Lawrence. One of the projects the students took on with some of their advisors was to grow a garden on West Junior High, and they were supplying some of their foods to the farmers market. We all know about the farmers market and why that is important, not only for economic development, but also for just watching things grow and getting people involved in that process. You will hear some of these things this evening and certainly other things as well. I will just briefly go through the introduction, and I'll start with Daniel Dermitzel. He's Associate Director and co-founder of Cultivate KC, an urban agricultural association that works to create sustainable, community-engaged farms throughout the Kansas City metro area. The organization works to provide an abundance of fresh and healthy food to city residents and to increase job opportunities through farming, to beautify and revitalize neighborhoods, and to contribute to healthier living for individuals. Mr. Dermitzel is the former co-owner of Trailside Farm in Calhoun, Missouri, a certified organic vegetable farm, and he obtained a master's degree in herbal planning from UCLA. Bob Berkelbeil is a founding principal of BNIM, a multidisciplinary architecture, planning, and design firm in Kansas City. He is the founding chairman of the American Institute of Architects National Committee on the Environment, and was also instrumental in the formation of the U.S. Green Building Council and its LEED rating system. He received the Heinz Award in 2009 for his role in promoting green building design and for his commitment and action towards restoring social, economic, and environmental vitality to America's communities. Steve Rowland is the president and CEO of the Healthcare Foundation of Greater Kansas City. Steve previously worked as a legislative assistant to former U.S. Senator Tom Eagleton on human services issues, and in 1985, he became publisher of the Kansas City Business Journal. He joined the Ewan Kauffman Foundation and became the senior vice president. In 2003, Steve was appointed as director of the Missouri Department of Social Services, and in that role, he was responsible for a $6.2 million budget with over 8,500 staff members and 300 local staff offices. I hope you will see they're very diverse in what they will address this evening. And when I was looking at part of this, I thought to myself, how does this affect these three things they will talk about, the three people, behavior in people? How will it affect grades? How will it affect your health? And often we take things for granted, but what we eat is crucial to our health, and in many ways people would say spirituality. And where we live has a lot to do with who we are and how healthy we might be, and how much respect do we have for the environment. At this point, I will simply say you will have your opportunity for questions. So if you want to know something further that they're talking about, you can ask them. If it's something they did not cover that you really want to know, you can ask that question as well. Please give our guests a warm welcome to the University of Kansas, and I turn the program now over to Bill Lacey, Director of the Dole Institute of Politics.
Steve, Bob, Daniel, thank you all for coming tonight, and welcome to the Dole Institute and the University of Kansas. Let me start with a question for all three of you and answer it in whatever order you'd like to answer it. But take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about your background and how your organization works in the community. Looks like they're pointing at you,
Yeah,
Daniel.
it looks like it. My background is quite diverse. I guess not a straight line at all. I was born in Germany and came to the U.S. in 1988. Actually, at that time, to become a journalist, to study journalism in Los Angeles. And I did that, and after that I worked in LA in television news for a while. Went back to graduate school and got a degree in urban planning, wanting to become more of an activist, if you will. And even after that, where I ended up was a world trip that lasted about a year. And it was during that time that I wanted to become a farmer. Many of the ideas that I had absorbed during graduate school and just living in Los Angeles suddenly collided in this fascinating way with my experience in Asia and in China and places like that. It was really beautiful. And I returned to the U.S. and went straight to the Midwest where land was affordable to buy land to farm. Started the Trailside Farm, and then a few years later, the center here in Kansas City with Catherine Kelly, the co-founder. And our goal has been from the beginning to just to bring this activity of agriculture, of farming, to bring that to make it available in the city, to get urban residents to be interested in it. And for me, it's always been very, very easy to see how it would benefit urban design, sustainability, all these kinds of objectives. So And that's what our organization tries to do. At the core of it, we have a small acre-and-a-half organic farm. We have a training farm that's that came a little later, about 8 acres, where people have quarter-acre plots and are trained in market gardening. And then we have a whole host of educational and other outreach-type activities that we do.
Okay. Steve?
I was pointing at him.
I'm pointing at you, though.
I'm Steve Rowling. I grew up in a town of 8 people in Brazil, Missouri. I'm sure all of you have heard of Brazil, Missouri. It was my parents' house and a gas station across the street, and that was our town. My grandparents were farmers, and I grew up obviously in a rural community surrounded by farmers. My somewhat of an eclectic career, not planned. I started out, I'm a trained social worker. I went from social work to the dark side. I went into politics. I was an aide to Senator Eagleton, and I was privileged to serve Senator Eagleton when Senator Dole and Senator McGovern and all the people that you mentioned, Senator Mitchell, were there. And back when I considered politics was a fun, productive, worthwhile profession that got things done. Back in the 70s and 80s, Republicans and Democrats worked together, talked together, fought together, laughed together, got things done together. And I remember fond memories of Senator Dole. I was in the room when the food stamp bill was passed. And without Senator Dole's support, it would never passed. So I have some really warm memories. After the Senate, I came back to Kansas City and became a banker for a few years, and then became a publisher of a business newspaper for a few years, and then I had the honor of working for Mr. Kaufman at the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. Some of you may, if you go to Kaufman Stadium, that's Mr. Kaufman. He was an entrepreneur in Kansas City. And then I went to the state of Missouri and was director of social services, and now I'm at the Healthcare Foundation. Through my career, both in the for-profit world and the non-for-profit world, I've come to the realization that our foundation primarily serves agencies that help the poor, the uninsured, and the underserved. And it's my belief, my experience is that poor people, uninsured people, underserved people don't have the same choices that you and I have. There's health inequities that you and I don't have to deal with. There are barriers that I don't have to deal with, that poor people have to deal with around this issue and a lot of other issues. Just a real brief story, and then I'm in politics, so I talk maybe longer than I should. Our office is in a building in the worst crime area in Kansas City, the highest poverty, all the negative things about income and poverty. Because our board said if we're going to provide programming for the poor and the uninsured, we should not be in some fancy building downtown. We need to be in the urban area. So one day we have a janitor who is just absolutely fabulous. His floors in our building are as clean as these floors. They sparkle, and it's an old building in a pretty tough neighborhood. But he had so much pride in how he kept the building clean. And one day I saw him for his lunch hour running up and down the steps. And he was a man in his 50s, I think. And I noticed he was running down the steps to the point where he was sweating and breathing harder. And I said, Mr. Olds, I can't believe it. You work hard all day, you mop and take around all these machines. And during lunch hour, you exercise. How do you have this energy? And he looked at me and he kind of smiled, and he was kind of embarrassed that I recognized what he was doing. And then I said to him, I bet, Mr. Olds, you and your wife really enjoy taking long walks at nights and on weekends. And he looked at me and he went, Steve, you don't understand. He said, I don't own a car. I have to take 3 buses, 3 transfers to get to work. If I want fresh fruits and vegetables, I have to take 3 more buses to go to the grocery store because we don't have any grocery stores with fresh fruits and vegetables in our neighborhood. I have to go somebody else, and I don't have a car, so I have to take buses. So it takes me 6 buses to get to work, to the grocery store and get back home. And when I get back home, I literally have to run from the bus stop into my apartment and lock it. I ain't going to take any long walks with my wife on nights and weekends. That describes, I think, the different choices some of us have that some of us don't have.
Bob, talk a little bit about your background and what your firm does.
Well, I'm an architect. I studied here at KU. While I was here, I had the great good fortune to encounter Buckminster Fuller as a professor. He decided to come while I was here, and our dean at the time selected 15 of us just to spend full time with him. And he changed my worldview. Among many other things, he saw this environment within which we're living. He referred to it as Spaceship Earth. And he was pretty sure that we were challenged because the spaceship hadn't come with operating instructions. And he thought it was kind of important that we figure this out before we destroy the spaceship that our lives depend on. And so I had that experience as I started my career. And over time, I have discovered that as I've looked at these issues and looked at the fact that we're a part of a huge living system, and that for the first time in recorded history, we are modifying the life support system on this planet in a dramatic way. And when I dig deeper into that, and I've had the great good fortune to have scientists and ecologists and biologists and botanists all over the planet helping us, myself and my colleagues in our Kansas City office and in our other offices, try to sort this out. What I am discovering is that our behavior is the biggest factor, that we have, since the birth of Western scientific thought in the Industrial Revolution, we have separated ourselves from nature to our own demise. And there's some significant science that's been created on this, starting with E.O. Wilson at Harvard, who developed the science biophilia, or love of nature. And the short story is we are born and hardwired to be an integral part of nature. And in our current living environments, we have systematically and probably unintentionally separated ourselves from nature. And I've had a chance to look at this in community systems. Barbara mentioned Greensburg. We've, by accident, done a lot of work with communities that have experienced some kind of a disaster, and Greensburg was one of them. But we're currently working in our 10th community, currently working in Tuscaloosa, Springfield, Massachusetts, and Joplin. And in that process, we have discovered that when such an event occurs, there is a dramatic window of opportunity during which a community can come together and reconsider its future. Somehow I've discovered that we are hardwired to build back exactly what we had at the earliest possible moment. But if we can come together as a community just long enough to think about that, we might very well choose to build back something much better than what we had. And so now for about a decade or more, we've been thinking about what we're calling community resilience. And that's basically to address the man-made disaster that's slower, but actually much more critical than these natural disasters that are underway in every community in America, including Lawrence, including Kansas City. And you don't have to look at that very long before you recognize that the American dream that Senator Dole has been very passionate about his entire life is coming apart at the seams. And that we are the cause of that we have lost sight of this natural environment, or what we refer to as our natural capital, and that by so doing, we have diminished it, and that is beginning to undermine our social vitality, our economic vitality, and all these systems that we depend on, when you really examine them, are at least a century obsolete, I believe. And so the issue is, how do we wake up? How do we reinvent the American dream? And how do we develop community patterns that are regenerative, loving, restorative, and add vitality over time? And so I'm delighted you asked this question of us, and I look forward to having some conversation.
Tell him you know Brad Pitt. Tell him that. That's the best.
We'll get to that later. I'm going to, just so we're all kind of working off the same context, I'm going to ask each of you a very general question, but about your field. And then the rest of the questions will be just open up for the three of you. But let's start, Steve, with you. Tell people what a healthy community is.
If someone would ask me, how do you predict healthy outcomes for folks? I would say be lucky enough to be born to parents who live in a safe neighborhood, who own their own home, who live close to a grocery store, who live in a safe neighborhood, whose parents are college graduates, whose parents have health insurance, whose parents have friends and associates that play together, work together, go to church together, etc. In other words, you can predict in America the health outcomes of folks by their zip code. So if you want to know the life expectancy of someone who lives in a certain zip code, the chances are, if it's in a high crime, high poverty, low income, their life expectancy is 8 to 10 years different, lower, than someone who lives in a middle class neighborhood like I just described. It is amazing what we do to ourselves. If you don't have grocery stores, if you don't have parks, if you don't have livable neighborhoods, if you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, that's not just too bad, that's affecting your health outcomes and your longevity. This is an issue that's not just interesting to talk about, it's a life and death issue. So that's why we're passionate about it.
Okay. Bob, tell us a little bit about how sustainable planning, design, development play a part in improving the way that people live.
That'll take the next 3 hours. Sorry.
I'm sure you can work with a little
See if I can work it down.
Cut you off.
We have to change the current concept of design, frankly. But I think if we can work from the concept that Bucky always said, Bob, every decision you make as a human being either impacts the vitality of Spaceship Earth in a positive way or negative. No exceptions. And that's especially true as an architect, planner, designer, because you're making decisions that affect hundreds, thousands of people. And so at the core, I think, is a requirement. Instead of designing a building as a freestanding object on the landscape, as a piece of sculpture, we have to think of it as a part of a living system. And that's a community like Lawrence, but it's also all the life systems to which is it attached, like the watershed, air shed, job shed, et cetera. All those systems are influenced by what we design and build. So if we're certain that we're designing to be sure that every decision in terms of design or investment increases the vitality of the social, economic, and environmental systems simultaneously, then that's a good design. If it doesn't achieve that, then it's not beautiful. I think that's at the core of what we have to do, and that's what we're trying to do, and we're beginning to see examples where that's beginning to happen. We finished a building 2 years ago that was certified last year in Rhinebeck, New York, as the first building anywhere to be certified as a LEED Platinum building. That's the highest level of third-party review performance, and a living building. And living building goes a step beyond that. Platinum is basically third-party certification that you're doing less damage to the environment than anyone else. A living building actually gives something back. So it generates more energy than it consumes. It purifies more water than it pollutes. And this particular building at the Omega Center not only purifies its own wastewater, but all the wastewater for a campus of 150 buildings in a biological wastewater treatment system. So it's, think greenhouse, that's a sewage treatment plant. And as far as I know, it's the first sewage treatment plant in America that's been claimed by a yoga class as its venue.
That's
Top,
great.
Gives you an idea.
Yeah, exactly. Daniel, talk to us a little bit about what a sustainable food system is and what are food deserts.
Sustainable food system, I mean, that raises the question of what sustainability is, which I'm not sure I can answer, actually. And I'm not sure that this is something we can experience altogether at this point in our history as humans. But we can perhaps go a little bit in that direction that Bob just described as far as treading more lightly. I would say that what we need to do is reconnect to nature, as Bob says. That's absolutely, that's the missing link to any sustainable system. Nature is the supreme teacher for farmers, for sure, for sustainable farmers. And in some measure, it would be a sustainable food system would be one where we have principles of organic agriculture, and we would improve on those, and where we would have a direct connection between producers, consumers. No food not as a commodity, not something that is shipped across the globe. Not that shipping across the globe is inherently a bad idea, but it is a bad idea if something can be produced very easily and possibly more effectively and efficiently locally. And so I'm not sure that I know the answer beyond that. What is a sustainable food system? We have systems that are in place that feed the global population that I cannot imagine to be without at the moment. And so the question for a sustainable food system really conjures up a question for a completely for a redesigned society with a new paradigm, the kind of paradigm that Bob was talking about. And we are working our way sort of inch by inch in that direction on a small organic farm like ours, where we are learning the systems, where we're beginning to become perhaps a bit more accountable as far as just understanding what are the input-output flows, where are wastes going, what happens if these wastes, or what could be if these wastes were collected and returned to the soil and so forth. Those are the kinds of lessons we are learning, and I have to say beyond that, we could multiply that through our city, through this city, through other cities, and perhaps that would be the sustainable food system.
And briefly, what are food deserts?
Food deserts. I'm not sure how they're defined at this point, but basically that's the kind of thing Steve was talking about, where we have just inordinate amount of travel or distances that need to be traveled to get to fresh food. I mean, we have plenty of convenience stores and so forth with junk food. But to get to fresh food and healthy food, and if that takes a long time, we talk about a food desert.
Okay. Each of you are from a different area, but yet they're all interconnected. And it's clear that to make progress in this area, collaboration is absolutely critical. Talk a little bit about the importance of collaboration and some of the challenges that you may have faced in individual situations where you collaborated with someone.
Well, collaboration is at the core of our work, particularly in community work. So Greensburg is an example. By the time we got to Greensburg, we had worked with a number of communities. And typically what we try to do is get everyone in the community together in a gymnasium or something to have a community conversation. In Greensburg, there was nothing left. Except for a grain elevator, which is a reinforced concrete cylinders attached. It's a pretty strong design. And everything else was gone. And so FEMA was nice enough to provide circus tents for us. And so we sent out notices and we provided food, and families came back from all over the region back to Greensburg. And the first time we met in the tent, It was about greeting one another for the first time and mourning the lives that were lost and celebrating what they had had. And after a while, we began talking about what would you like to do. And it was in that tent, for the first time in my career with communities, we had a different mix of people. Typically in the gymnasiums, we had the elected officials, the Chamber of Commerce, the business people, and that in America generally is middle-aged, middle-class white males, with a few exceptions. This was the first time that all the women and all the children in the community were present in the conversation, and it dramatically changed the outcome, the conversation and the decisions they made. And they made extraordinary decisions. They were the first city in America to select LEED Platinum as their standard for rebuilding. They were the first city in America to really take water as a serious issue and assume every drop of water is a precious resource, capture it, purify it, use it, repurify it, reuse it, et cetera, on and on. So they've done some really impressive things, and I would argue it was because the children and women were an active part of that conversation. And so I'd done a lot of community work, but it was there that I first started discovering what I call now a collaborative dialogue of discovery. Since then, for example, in Tuscaloosa, because we started much later, we didn't have the time for all that dialogue. And so the mayor said, we hired you because you do this impressive community work and everyone's involved, but we've lost a lot of time. And so I have selected a 40-person steering committee who are well connected, they know the community, and you can pretend like it is the community and just work with them, and we won't have to take all those time for community meetings. So we met with them, and there were 40 people, and they were intelligent, well connected, but there was only one face of color on that committee, and Tuscaloosa is roughly 50-50. And so we said, well, not gonna work. And so we compromised, and we developed a social media process. So the night we were hired at City Council, we launched a website called Tuscaloosa Forward. And 2 weeks later, we had our first community meeting. And we always ask before the meeting, how many will be here, best case, worst case, so we can have enough facilitators, et cetera. And as near as I could tell, double best case showed up. And the mayor whispered in my ear, this is the most diverse meeting in the history of Tuscaloosa. And we said, how many have you been to the website? 75% of the hands.
Wow.
We said, how many visits do you think we've had? And the highest guess that night was 3,500. The real answer, 2 weeks after we launched the website, was 39,000. And it kept growing. And our final master plan had at least 100 ideas that were created on that website in that conversation. And we continue to move in that direction. And so I'm beginning to realize that all these new communication techniques can be a really powerful way to inform the community, to engage in something. And actually, when you do have the face-to-face, people come with much more passion and much more integrity and much more information. And the process informs the elected officials. So we also use a piece of software we call Wordle. And we take all the words that have been used in all these conversations and put it in a software program. It makes a diagram with all the words, but in different sizes. And invariably, when you ask the community leaders what the priorities are, they give us, the names. And when we finally get the Wordle result, we can find the words that they use, but they're usually about this big. And the words they didn't mention are about this big. And so it's a very clear picture of what the issues are in that community, and it informs the leadership, and they can be more courageous and make tougher decisions if they know the community's moving in a direction with them.
Okay.
The best example I can give you of collaboration that happened in Wyandotte County, which is Kansas City, Kansas, pretty close to here. About 2 years ago, a national report came out, and the most unhealthy county in the state of Kansas was Wyandotte County. Mayor Reardon had been mayor for a couple years, and his first response was, they're wrong. I'm mayor, I'm doing a good job. We have the University of Kansas Medical School. My gosh, these people are crazy. And after going through that for a couple weeks, he started going out and listening. And he thought, well, hell, maybe I'm not wrong. And so what Mayor Reardon did, within a year's time, he went from having the worst health outcomes and being pretty much the cover child, the county became the cover child of how not to do preventative health care, to about a year and a half later, Robert Wood Johnson, one of the largest foundations in America, is inviting him to their boardroom to explain to him how he turned the city and the county around. And what he did was, similar to what Bob described, is it takes a village. He didn't just go to the poor people. He just didn't go to the business people. He didn't just go to the religious people. He just didn't go to the young people or the old people. He went to everybody and invited them under the tent to figure this out. How are we going to make our community healthier? He went to the city council, and every time they pass an ordinance on streets to rebuild the streets or fix the potholes or to redo the streets in Kansas City, Kansas, now when you build a street, you have to have a bike path and a walking path. Now over a period of 20 years, Kansas City, Kansas will be different. So the mayor, from listening and from getting input from all aspects of the community, came to the conclusion and is being now honored around the country by one of the largest health foundations in the world. I mean, it's just amazing the turnaround in the culture of a community by listening to all the people and then taking action.
Yeah, I think perhaps the sort of most distinguishing feature of this work I've been doing is integration and collaboration. Ever since we started to think about urban agriculture, it was all about that. And that wasn't necessarily what we expected, although perhaps we should have. The interest in urban agriculture and in our work came from every direction, from all kinds of professionals, from environmentalists, from people from the health, area of health and food, from community activists, from economic development people, teachers, educators. All kinds of people were interested in what this urban agriculture was about and how it could benefit them and their objectives. And for us, that was at times very challenging because we don't know anything about their fields, and yet there was an understanding, or a sense anyway, that we could be of help, and that all of this was, in fact, really working toward these objectives. To figure that out has taken us a lot of time, and actually, I think was challenging for our organization to move through. But it's something that Steve and I were discussing actually a little earlier. How his organization is, traditionally in healthcare is now concerned with complete streets and urban design and sidewalks and bike paths. And our organization is interested in the same things. We're not just about urban agriculture. We're about an entire set of design principles, if you will. And the same is true for the architects at BNIM. And that kind of sort of merging of disciplines within each of our organization is really interesting to me, and it's pointing to something that perhaps we need to see, the sort of unified nature of our endeavors altogether. Very, very interesting to me. Another thing that's just been profoundly inspiring and that I never saw coming either is the work with our refugees. We have at the Juniper Gardens Training Farm, we offer these quarter-acre plots to people both in the neighborhood, but primarily the program got started through a collaboration with Catholic Charities, which had a refugee resettlement program. And so primarily from people from Somalia in the beginning, later from Burma, and now Bhutan, and a couple of other countries are able to grow food and build a small farm business through the work we do there. And I have been, years ago already, we got in touch. We developed relationships with the Hmong community in Kansas City. Many of the Hmong are excellent growers and have built really wonderful farms.
Make sure everybody knows where the Hmongs are from.
From Laos, but not only. The Kansas City Hmong are, I believe, mostly from Laos, but I think there's other Southeast Asian countries where they are. And have wonderful farms. It was just such a pleasure to be interacting with them. So what I've just found to be really profound experiences to be working with the Hmong in the beginning, now with the refugees, and it's very reciprocal. We're learning from each other, and I would like to bring that experience to other people. So the more we can get people to come to Juniper Gardens Training Farm, the more we can get some farmers market customers. These refugees, some of them sell at a high-end market in Brookside. I mean, that's an all-organic market with a very affluent clientele. And there are people who have spent the last 15 years in refugee camps and are now selling fresh organic vegetables to the residents there. That's an incredible experience, and that is the kind of connection that I experienced when I traveled in China, or the kind of bridging that was happening inside of myself that I now see happening right here in Kansas City. It's a wonderful experience.
And they're growing and selling vegetables that some of us have never seen before.
That's
they're
correct.
really tasty.
That's right. They are moving very quickly ahead of anything I know about farming. They have a much deeper understanding of agriculture and of those systems, and it's just a joy to see that.
You should have brought some of those items tonight, Daniel, so we could all try them.
Come to think of it, we should have asked one of them to come here.
Oh, that would have been a lot of fun. We'll have to talk about doing that some other time.
We didn't want to compete with the excellent food that was in the reception, by the way, so great job for those of you that provided that.
You're talking about areas that are very complicated, and like you've just been describing, they're very interconnected. I'm curious to ask all of you to talk a little bit about your views of is there a driving force in this progress? Is it, or is it more a mixture of things? Is it a government policy thing? Is it the work of private organization? Is it markets? What is really critical to making this work?
Well,
Yeah, go for it.
if you want to have healthy outcomes, some would think that if we have great doctors, great medical equipment, great nurses, et cetera, that will ensure that you have great health outcomes. The reality of it is that only affects 20% of health outcomes. 80% is other stuff. So while it's wonderful to have a big hospital in your neighborhood with all the fancy machines and all the fancy specialty docs, the reality of it is our lifestyle, our health outcomes is affected by 80% of other stuff. And that other stuff is the choices that we make. Do we smoke? Do we drink? Do we have safe sex as young people? The built environment that Bob talked about. Do we have grocery stores close by? Do we have parks? Do we have community gardens? Do we have fresh fruits and vegetables? And then the what we call the social determinants. Are we living in neighborhoods that are safe, absent of violence? Do people have high school, college degrees, et cetera, et cetera? So the reason healthcare costs so much in America is we put all of our eggs into the healthcare basket, that 20%. And most countries put a lot of their eggs, in fact, most of their eggs, in that other basket of 80%. And we've got to do a better job in America of dealing with that 80% bucket. I'm not saying we don't want to have the best specialty docs, et cetera, that's good. But the reason America healthcare costs so much money is that we're not doing enough to educate, and we're not doing enough around public policy to incentivize people on that other 80%. Some of the things that I'm pretty involved in, the tobacco issue. In Kansas, you were one of the states recently that passed clean indoor air. In Missouri, Missouri right now has the lowest cigarette tax in the nation, I'm embarrassed to say. Our foundation and others are working to raise that tax in a ballot initiative in November this year. Those kind of policy changes help incentivize people, especially young people. The tobacco industry, just like the fast food industry, they target our young people. Because if McDonald's can get somebody at 14 or 13 eating their French fries, they've got them. Or if tobacco can get somebody smoking a Marlboro at 15, they got them for a lot of years. And so that's who they're marketing to. So policies that help incentivize young people not to get into those habits are going to improve health outcomes for that generation for years to come. So in our point of view as a healthcare foundation, especially dealing with the poor, and unfortunately fast food places and tobacco places target low-income people. We've got to do a better job of changing public policy. We've got to do a better job of changing the built environment. We've got to do a better job of providing better opportunities, better choices, take down some of the barriers that poor people have that people like us don't have because we live in different kind of neighborhoods.
So I'm not sure, Bill, that any of us know all the things that are at play here. It's a really complex issue. I do think, though, that there is a significant shift underway. And I think it is a result of some of the things I can identify. Is I think there's a general feeling that things aren't working out very well. We know that for example, the generation that is in college here today will be the first generation in American history that doesn't have the same level of affluence when they become adults as their parents. This is the first generation that won't live. Average age will not be as much as their parents. That's shocking to me. And a lot of it is the green impact zone, the area that Steve was describing, although you should know the Kansas City Star refers to that same area as the killing zip code for a reason. So we have become so detached from these healthy living systems. And I think even though a lot of people aren't familiar with those statistics, the truth is there is a growing sense that this just isn't working out too well. And there's surely something better. And so when people see the gardens that Daniel and Catherine are creating and what's going on there, when people see this kind of food at the market, when they see what this looks like even, quite aside from enjoying eating it, when they see developments like Greensburg, and we're just starting one in the killing zip code in Kansas City, the Green Impact Zone.
Let's call it that.
That is reclaiming an abandoned school that's been empty for 15 years. And of course the school went dark because the neighborhood was declining and eventually there were just not enough students, so the school closed. And so we have purchased that school, and with our partners from New Orleans in the Make It Right district of the lower 9th Ward, we are repurposing that school for housing for what I expect will be primarily single moms. And in the school will be a community center, a computer lab and resource center. It will be linked to Truman Hospital, who operate a health center there. And so their parents, these single moms, will have support for the first time to get the education or training they need to get a job and hold a job. They'll have support for their children so that they are building human capacity in this residential setting with outside support. We will have urban gardens, a greenhouse, a living machine on that site, and then some new housing built on the site. And we see that whole effort as a healthy virus, that schools were the center of neighborhoods. And when a school goes dark, it's kind of the final chapter, unless we find a way to repurpose that school to be the new center of revitalization in that community. And I'm optimistic that we can start using these techniques that both of my colleagues use everywhere, but focus them on an area and see if we can totally rethink our community living patterns and operational patterns. And I think one aspect of that is literally building a new economy, a local living economy that, from my point of view, needs to be a post-carbon economy. We need to figure out how to drive the carbon out of our operating community systems in order to reverse climate change, which will totally destroy all these systems if we can't do that. And I think now we know enough to do that. It's not, we're no longer limited by technology or anything else. We're only limited by what's going on between these two ears. And I think if we can come together as collaborative community partners, we can use these techniques that my colleagues are using and bring them to bear in an integrated way and transform our communities.
As far as how do we make this work, I ask myself that question a lot. It's a very personal experience in the end for me, and I'm not sure that I know any recipe that goes beyond sort of my own experience, really. But when I became a farmer, I was faced with the reality of really hard work. And I think that's something many of you can perhaps relate to. You grew up on farms still. There were gardens, large gardens. There was a lot of work. And we have a tendency to not want to do that as people. So there's a a lot of people would romanticize, I suppose, to some degree this work. And when we do it, we have to face the tired bones and muscles, and how do we keep going? I think that's the greatest challenge for us as a society. If we want to see urban agriculture or sustainable agriculture grow, we need to figure out how we make it something that people are motivated to do. And that motivation is something that we can partly generate in ourselves, and we need to work on the kinds of attitudes, ways of thinking, ways of looking at the world, if you will, life goals that motivate us to do whatever it is we do. And to what extent are they out of whack? To what extent do we need to shift our life goals? Do we need to rethink maybe some of the myths that we have adopted over centuries of our history, that we hold on to so tightly, that tell us who we are? Are we that really? Are we only that? Can we change? I think that's a very big challenge for the United States, for other societies, but this is something that I think about a lot. To give you an example of the kinds of myths that individuality, I mean, I'm not, I'm a foreigner in the end. I came here when I was 20-some years old, and that strong element of individual rights and individuality, which I so appreciated on some level, and also what brought me here as a young person. I also recognize the degree to which it limits us, if you will, from some of the developments and some of the designs which are very communal, and which require of us to have a more communal responsibility. Those are some of the most dearly held convictions and beliefs that we need to discuss. I'm not sure we can change them. Maybe we shouldn't, but we do need to discuss. We need to have a dialogue about them. What is a good life? And we have some sort of unquestioned assumptions of what that is, a good life. And it strikes me as though even in some of the efforts to rebuild neighborhoods, work in neighborhoods that are with a lot of poverty and disadvantage and so forth, we are liable to replicate certain dysfunctional systems that we have already that are in the more affluent neighborhoods, if we don't rethink how we develop. So an example that we often talk about is for example the green space that in our inner cities, in Kansas City as well. There's so much unused land at this point. So many neighborhoods that have depopulated with just one vacant lot after another. And I often wonder how can we learn to think of this as a resource, not something that needs to be mowed down, that needs to be a sort of a clean grass surface, but something that can actually be allowed to regenerate the way nature regenerates through ecological succession into a woodland, for example. That would take us through various stages of a certain kind of weed ecology, and then at some point trees and so forth. And can we actually take joy in that? Can we find that a reaffirming and a sort of invigorating sight that we know something is changing here? We are no longer using our lawnmowers every 10 days to cut this down to create a certain look that we have come unquestioningly to become the norm and desirable. Can we change that? And these landscapes are all around us, throughout the city, all over the place. We love our mowers. But that's just one example. That's just one example, I believe, where I nowadays, I can remember when I liked that sort of manicured surface. It has its appeal. But today, I don't like it. It doesn't do anything for me. What I see is a sort of continual intervention into a natural process of succession. If we can learn to see our environment in those terms, I think there's an opportunity for us to really shift some of the profound habits and patterns that shape our environment.
So Daniel, you make some really important points, I think, but I'd like to comment on just a couple. First of all, I'm not quite as pessimistic as you about not finding the people who want to do the work to have gardens. And I'm also beginning to be more encouraged that a lot of the people that have been caught up in that ill-conceived vision of the American dream, I think are waking up. Even the most affluent are finding, God, I have 5 times the money that my parents had, and I don't feel that good about it. And so they're really looking for, how do I have more freedom, more beauty, more joy, not so much stress. And so I think a lot of them are getting, it's not uncommon for me to encounter one of my very successful CEO clients, and we'll be having a conversation about a project, and I'll find them in tears about their own personal lives.
Right.
So I think there is some shift happening, number one. Number two, when we really started on this course enthusiastically, I would argue, in the Industrial Revolution, we all thought the issue was not enough hands to do the work to keep us comfortable. We thought we had unlimited resources, no environmental problems, and the only problem was not enough people to do the work. So Henry Ford made a factory, and the first famous building that was an industrial building was the Crystal Pavilion, made of, all the columns and beams and everything were made in a factory and assembled and glazed. And then Dr. Crapper came along and gave us the water closet, and Dr. Carrier gave us air conditioning, and Mr. Otis gave us elevators, and each one of those steps separated us from nature. And I think we're now thinking, well, wait a minute, that might have worked for Henry Ford, but now our environment is being trashed, and we can't consume all this energy without creating a climate problem. And, oh, by the way, a lot of people don't have work. It's not like we don't have enough hands. We have way too many hands and no viable work. And so I'm actually more optimistic that if people can experience your gardens, and if they can experience a different urban environment like we hope gets created in the Green Impact Zone, that I think we're missing the great models. So back to Bucky Fuller. Bucky and I talked a lot about change, and he always said, Bob, the only way to make significant change is to make the thing you're trying to change obsolete. And I would argue that so far, and so I'll give you an example. I think this made the old phone system obsolete. It doesn't take a lot of sales. Once people experience something like this, everyone wants it. Well, I think with regard to our community patterns, we've done a lot of good things, and certainly my partners on either side have done exemplary work. But all of it in aggregate is not yet brilliant enough to make everything else obsolete. And I think we're right on the threshold of doing that, and we need to do more of it. We need to create these kinds of really exciting, beautiful, healthy communities, neighborhoods in cities all across America, and then I think all the debate will be over and we'll see a major shift.
It feels like we've been here about 15 minutes, but believe it or not, we've actually been here an hour. So I'm going to have one more question. Obviously, I didn't ask probably half the questions I had tonight. So this is going to be your chance to ask questions after I ask one more question. So if I could get our students who are here with the cordless mics to come on out. My last question, gentlemen, how many students do we have here tonight? Raise your hands. Look at all these students here. Okay, excellent. A lot of these students probably are curious what advice the three of you would give them to work towards what you've been talking tonight. You have the opportunity to speak to a lot of young people who are right now getting their education, who maybe can fine-tune this or fine-tune that before they get out of school. Briefly, what would each of you say to them?
Oh, yeah.
Just for the record, Daniel's already given everyone permission not to mow their yards.
You got that.
By the way, Daniel, we refer to those mowed landscapes you were talking about as drug-dependent rugs. We're not having that anymore.
Very nice. Well, I would I would actually, I very much agree with you, Bob. I'm not pessimistic. If I sounded, then just, that's not what I meant to. I'm extremely optimistic, and I think you all ought to be as well, because in some ways, I believe it is as though we have reached some kind of mountain peak, perhaps, in which we have a view that we didn't have 10 years ago, perhaps 20 years ago. That view ought to benefit you all in your decisions and in how you can envision your own life beautifully. So I'm very optimistic about that and the potential that that has created. I would suggest that you take every opportunity to get to know nature and to try a dialogue with nature, literally. Try talking to other species around you and begin to listen to them as well. That's pretty much my best recommendation.
So I'll try to share briefly. I've had the great good fortune to encounter in my life a lot of mentors after Bucky. Leon Shenandoah, the great Native American chief, Robert Mueller, the Undersecretary General, on. And they all shared one thing in common, I think, in a way. And I'll have to sort of merge all their different languages into one statement, but essentially it was when deciding on a life path or your next decision, follow your heart or follow your intuition, or Leon would say, follow the Great Spirit, that is always the truth. And I have found that to be the case. So get quiet enough to know what that is, and when you feel connected with that, go for it. The other thing, to inform then your acts once you're pursuing that, I think it really helps to get in touch with what I tend to call the genius of a place. And usually that means going back before human settlement and trying to understand what was this place before we showed up and started modifying it. And usually when you do, it looked nothing like it does now. Not to take it back as a historic artifact, but just to understand how nature works and how can we work with it rather than fight it. And I think that makes an extraordinary difference. When Lewis and Clark were on the Missouri River, when they camped at the confluence of the Kaw and Missouri, Meriwether Lewis wrote some of the most beautiful stuff in that whole journal. He was stunned at the extraordinary diversity of the Carolina parakeets he had never seen in this much color and this much abundance. He was struck by the Kansas Indians and the bison they introduced him to, which he'd never seen before. And the, quote, wide Missouri, which at that time was about 1 mile wide. Now the Corps of Engineers has obviously dramatically modified it, and it's a totally different river. So, that part of the country, and to some degree here, although you're kind of in between zones, was an oak savanna, which was beautiful, had much more abundance than what we have today. Why is it no longer an oak savanna? Because the oak savanna was a collaborative effort, partnership between Native Americans who had discovered when the Great Spirit provided lightning and there was a fire, the following year was more diversity on the landscape and more wildlife. And so when the Great Spirit didn't provide the fire, they did. And so that burning created a beautiful, very vital landscape. And it also manufactured topsoil. So when they were on the river, our topsoil was about 2.5 to 3 feet deep. When we came, we suppressed fire. So all those little oak saplings had a lot of success. It became an oak forest. There wasn't enough sun to maintain those beautiful native grasses. And so the indigenous European grasses came, and they not only didn't manufacture topsoil, they couldn't hold the soil that was there. So we've sent about 2.5 to 3 feet of topsoil down the Missouri to the Mississippi, to the Gulf of Mexico, creating the delta in New Orleans. And we've sent with it phosphorus that our landscape is starving for, and it's collected there, creating a dead ocean environment. So just understanding the place in which we're living and operating will start informing what an appropriate action is to work with nature. And we find when we do that, we get extraordinary results.
I have a hard time remembering when I was your age as students, but my memory was I'm pretty impatient now, but when I was in college, I was very impatient, and I had a lot of passion. Those of you here tonight obviously have some passion for this issue. The advice I would give you is this work is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's your life's work. And through the course of your life, you're going to have some disappointments, you're going to have some folks who disappoint you, you're going to have some things that don't go your way, and it's easy to say, screw it, I'll do something else. My advice to you is think of the kind of the big picture and make it your life's work. Because like this gentleman, these two gentlemen next to me, it takes a lifetime. And it takes a lot of lifetimes if we're going to make a change, make a difference. So what I'd say to the students is go for it now, be passionate, be intense, but smell the flowers along the way. So 60 years from now, when you're as old as at least I am, you still have some fire in the belly to do this same kind of work, because we're still going to need you 60 years from now.
Okay, let's open it up to questions and answers. We're going to take 20 or 25 minutes. I'm going to bias in favor of students on this, and we have our first one right back there. And hold up your hand, and one of the guys will bring the mic by. I'm not going to call on people. So Justin, you find somebody, and they'll be next. Sorry, go ahead.
As building technologies increase their longevity, do our design decisions today have a greater impact on the future than the design decisions of yesterday? And kind of as fodder for this, you've referenced disasters as a good time to make rapid change. Well, what about areas that haven't had a disaster? And in particular, I'm thinking of 95th and Metcalf South Mall.
Just to name one. Well, so those are great questions. The truth is our decisions today, unless they're made carefully and with research, have far greater negative impacts in most cases than even a decade ago or 2 decades ago, because we're using much more toxic materials and because the environment is in a much more fragile place, so it doesn't take that much to tip it into a really disastrous kind of situation. I think, again, the issue always is what is the appropriate thing to do? What is the most, we at BNIM begin thinking about how does each decision add life or the capacity for life to the system. And if we just reduce it to something like that, I mean, there are lots of different phrases you could use, but it boils down to just that. And to be willing to look carefully at a systems approach to answer that question. An easy question to ask, and you could answer it simply and carelessly and be dead wrong. But I think if we really look at these larger systems, we can find huge opportunities to be loving, regenerative, and to create a new future.
Okay, next question. Justin, do you have one?
I just want to say it's really exciting to be in the midst of this conversation, and it's really great to hear the intersection of what all of you bring to the table. As a young activist student who's getting ready to graduate, it's really great to be in the room with a bunch of other people who I think we're in a position to begin to make connections and fill in the gaps in all of the different sectors that come into play with food systems. And I'm really curious about the capacity that it will take to do that, and what you all think it will take to build the capacity necessary for integrated, sustainable food systems.
What does it take? I think that, and maybe that would be another recommendation for anyone, yourselves, as you contemplate your future, is to try to get to know yourself. Try to understand what you really want or don't want. And I think sometimes that's we don't spend enough time doing that. We just adopt views. So quietness, seeking some quietness may be a good way to do that. As far as choosing an area in which to become active, I find that maybe much of my life I've spent my energy on areas in which I had ultimately no control. I really wasn't able to make any difference in those areas. I would say things and have opinions, but they were not really within my expertise, and they were also not. I did not simply have the authority or the control to really affect change. So, as we're thinking of Metcalf and 95th or some of these environments that are around us, while I don't want to discourage us from rethinking them, I also want to be realistic about the difference individuals like us can make in those cases, and understand that there are many opportunities for this kind of regenerative lifestyle, if you will, that open up in front of us every day, every moment that we let go, that we pass by, that we don't act on, that have to do with interactions with colleagues, with other people, with our children, with our family, with nature, and so forth. Seize those opportunities. Begin to open your eyes to them, and suddenly your capacity will have multiplied tremendously. There will be those people like Bob who have the authority and can control what happens at 95th and Metcalf, and they will naturally do so. But I think it's important for us to understand what is sort of our radius of control or influence, and our capacity may be just multiplying tremendously if we act effectively within that radius of influence.
So just as a disclaimer, I don't claim control or authority.
I was counting on you to do it. I was counting on you.
And in a way, Emily, I think we should be asking you the question you ask us. But my feeling is that we're in an exciting time of exploration. And I think we don't know all the answers to those food systems yet. But you have good experience, Daniel does, there are many others. And I think now's the time where we really experiment with the best of the best. We each do the thing that we are most inspired by, and we share that in this collaborative dialogue of discovery. But we share it now globally. And that we will attend, I think, with respect to food, that it'll be a global sharing, but it will be in bioclimatic regions just like the one we're operating in rather than everything else. And I think we can move a lot faster. If we look at the large pattern scientists now like Jim Lovelock, the Nobel Prize-winning English scientist, who arguably is the most accurate large pattern forecaster on the planet, he believes that we actually have waited too long to act, and that we're now all just having a meaningless conversation because human life will not survive. And I think it's hard to argue with his predictions because no one has been better than he. I mean, he's the guy that NASA hired to determine whether or not we could fly to the moon and land and come back, for example. He's the guy that developed the Gaia principle. But I think he's missed one thing, and that is he has based your ability to change based on human capacity for change in the past. And I think we have greater capacity for accelerated change than ever before because of these new technologies and communication systems. So if Daniel does something brilliant at the garden, or Emily does something brilliant with her urban planning and food systems, then everyone's going to know that almost immediately. And I think more and more of us have an appetite for knowing what are the good solutions, and people surf looking for the good ideas. And so I'm really optimistic that particularly for you college students now, that what you do can have far more impact than what I have done. And I'm optimistic about the results of that shift.
Emily, you identified yourself as an activist. And so I would say to you that it's important to have the passion and educate your friends, but I think it's got to go beyond that. Activists try to change. We may not all be Bob Doles who try to change the world, but we can change our families, our neighborhoods, our cities, our states, and if we don't, who will? So I think activists, if you think of yourself as someone who cares about this issue, it's important to do your own thing in your own family, and that's where it starts. But I would challenge you to think beyond that and think into things like public policy, maybe city ordinances, maybe neighborhood groups. Do something that changes the culture in which you live, or the atmosphere in where you live. And then once that gets going, then go bigger and go bigger. I think activists have a responsibility to do more than just take care of themselves and their families. I think we have to take care of each other. And so I challenge young people to don't just think about your passion and your situation, think about the rest of us. I think this individuality thing is important, it's crucial, but it's not enough.
Next question. Who's got a question for me? Come on, guys, let's move. Got a lot of questions, very little time. Direct questions, please.
I am hoping that you as a panel can talk about some of the challenges and opportunities of American federalism in changing our foodscapes, and also the challenge of the proper role of government. So Steve, you're talking a lot about public policy, but there's a pretty vibrant debate about what government should and shouldn't do.
Talk more about that. I'm not sure I understand.
Be back.
So think about the 80% that you mentioned.
Yeah.
The World Health Organization in Closing the Gap really said income inequality and education is important, but in this country, using government as a tool to reduce those is going to be a hurdle. Should we raise taxes to get better health? Or an integrated food system?
Well, you suggested healthcare. You suggested healthcare. We could use food system. I don't want to make this a political argument, especially after what's happened in Washington in the last few days, arguing the Affordable Care Act. But the reality is, in America right now, with Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and all the folks who work for city and county governments around America, most of us get our health care from government. But yet, most of us also say we want government out of health care because government has screwed it up. We want the private insurance, we want the private payers because government can't handle health care. I think there's a role for government. I think, you look at this young man over here, Bob Dole. If he wouldn't have been around, if George McGovern wouldn't have been around, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in the last 70 years, 60 years, and then that on 50 years, 40 years, would have died from malnutrition. There has to be a role for government for certain things. Education, I think, is clearly one. I think healthcare is clearly one. What's the proper role? We're still discussing as Americans. But to say that government should have no role, I think is a huge mistake.
I think one of the issues is I've been traveling to Washington now for a quarter of a century lobbying, and I've seen a dramatic change in that time. When Steve's former employer, Tom Eagleton, and Bob Dole, in their early years, there was a real dialogue going on. I mean, it was a healthy conversation and people were exploring. And I haven't found that for a number of years. It's a really toxic environment now, and I think as I look at this, there are two issues. One of which I think when the founders created this country, one of the key ingredients was real involvement on the part of the citizens. It required knowledgeable, active citizenship, and I think for the most part we've given that up, and that's a tragedy, and we have to overcome it, and if we're going to, it's going to be all of us, and especially young people who decide it's time to get engaged. The second thing is, people ask me a lot about renewable resources, and the most important one is elected officials. Remember that they're a renewable resource, and if they're not doing the job, there's a way to deal with that. But we all have to turn out, and we all have to tell them what we expect.
I'm not sure that I have any good answers to what government can do, federal level anyway. I think that the attention that the USDA, for example, gives sustainable agriculture is growing, but it's a very, very small, minuscule percentage of the Farm Bill, for example. In fact, some of the urban farmers that we work with have benefited from that, so that gives me hope. There was a program, very beautiful, practical program that was administered by the USDA of making funds available for growers to have high tunnels, which are these very basic greenhouse structures to extend the season. That was a very effective program. It helps a lot of growers really quick to have one of those tunnels. Changes the income picture and production of your farm quickly. I don't know. Can we work to increase those kinds of programs, to increase funding that can be made of it? I suppose we can, and yet I'm not relying on that. I ultimately think that we need to. What really matters to me, and that may be just something that will pass at some point, but currently occupies a lot of my thinking, is how can we truly be what it is we ask of others to be? Can we be it? And when we can, will there be something that will be so convincing about how we act that will actually sort of transform people around us and communities around us? If we haven't figured that out, I'm not sure anyone else can figure it out for us. So that's not a very satisfying answer, but it is the question that occupies me the most at the time.
We're going to take two more questions. First one's right here.
We have such a wonderful example in this community of what these gentlemen have been trying to tell us. I don't know, she might even be in the audience. Nancy O'Connor from the Community Merck. Maybe several of you know her, or maybe you're too on the hill to know her. But she started with one small school in town and convinced all the kids that she wanted to help them make a garden in their own school. And from that one school, she's taken almost all of the schools, started with a junior high and is now doing high school and elementary school. And these kids are all just profound exponents of sustainable agriculture and organic gardening. And she just reached out to the community and has changed things. They had at the end of last year a wonderful feast of all the products that they had put together and grown. And I think it has to start in each community, and she has done that. She's a marvelous role model and a heroine of many of us.
We have time for one last question, please.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That was good. Thank you for sharing that.
I completely agree that the trim tab of a beautifully effective example is the quickest way to make the worst parts of the present system obsolete. I want to ask you, being that we're at the Institute of Politics, to delve deeper into the unequal or uneven battleground, political battleground that all of this exists in, being that we have continuing war on Amish people trying to get people raw milk, or the people in California trying to get people raw milk, or Monsanto's continuing war on farmers around the world. How do we deal with this horrific conjunction of the transnational corporation and the domestic ninnying police state that makes it very difficult for those shining examples to be replicated because they get smashed when they're shown?
I'm not trying to be trite, but we deal with it as a people who listen and talk and respect each other's opinions. Back in the 70s, when Bob Dole was in the Senate, 70s and 80s, people who were very liberal and people who were very conservative sought out each other for their opinions and for their views. I can remember vividly in Eagleton's office, who was a moderate to liberal Democrat, it was so common for Barry Goldwater and Bob Dole and Senator Baker and Senator Javits, who are all conservative Republicans, to come in and say, Tom, I've been thinking about this, what do you think? And Eagleton would do the same thing. It was common for folks from different points of view, more liberal, more conservative, to come at each other and just brainstorm with each other. That was the norm. It was normal for staff on those of us who work for those senators to get together and brainstorm and to talk about issues like that. What can we do about this? We were looking for solutions. And that's what we're not doing now, in my opinion, in American politics now. We're looking to embarrass somebody or to point fingers at somebody or to blame somebody. And I hate to sound like my father said it back in the olden days, here's how we did. But back in the olden days, when Bob Dole was in the Senate, I believe, and maybe my memory is not as good as it used to be, but damn it, we were looking for solutions. And no one senator thought, you got to do it my way or I'm going to walk. You got to do it my way or I'm going to not listen to you anymore. It was all about getting together a bunch of folks and figuring out what in the hell we do about this. How can we change this? And that's a different political system that we have today. And that's what I think, to use the, what do you call it, renewable, what is it?
Renewable resource.
Yeah. We have to put people in Washington who are willing to listen, to compromise, to talk to each other, rather than to have their mind made up on day one that this is what I believe and I don't care what anybody else believes, this is how I'm going to go. Because the American governmental system is not that easy to understand. And it's more complex than that, and it's more shades of gray than that. And we need all of us to kind of figure it out together. And we elect these people to go to Washington to represent us, and if all they're going to do is, here's my opinion and this is what it's going to be, without listening to other folks, then I don't think we have as good a democracy as we deserve.
Well, I would. I mean, that's a question we ask ourselves sometimes at the farm. I mean, these questions, especially about industrial agriculture and its sort of transnational reach, and what does it do to agricultural systems in other parts of the world. There are some just tragic developments, and some of these we can learn from through the refugees that we work with, for example. These did not happen fast. They will not be solved fast or undone. If I can just, again, from my personal experience, the only time I was able to change anything was if I stayed with it, if I was patient. That's a very rare commodity, I think, today. And it's very difficult for me. Agriculture taught me that to some extent, because if you're not staying with it, if you don't have a long-term view, sustainable agriculture will not yield for you. So that's why this connection to nature and the re-familiarization with sustainable agricultural systems can be so useful. I think that there are avenues that we are not even considering because we have no experience with what happens if we stay with something. And if we listen, like Steve says, not have it just an oppositional relationship, a purely oppositional relationship, not want to win. That's a very, this desire to be victorious. I'm right, and therefore it must, my way. That's not easy, I think, to change, and the more we can work on ourselves to change that, I do believe we can influence others. It is in our dialogue with elected officials. We have to, in the few times I've had these dialogues, and there's not been many, and they're not on, national scale, but if we can speak the language that is sort of, if we can speak a new language, a language of patience, of generosity, that does transmit. And I would encourage you all to try it, because that's the only thing that I've found to be effective, actually.
So I really support, especially the last comment that Daniel made. I think it's hugely important today. But I would share a couple of other things in addition to that. One is, if you look at nature, things can get really wild when a system is collapsing. There's a lot of bizarre behavior. Actually, and it isn't always a collapse, it's just preceding an enormous move. And there's actually a German term for that called Zugenruha. And they use that to describe...
The eyebrows went up a little bit there, Bob.
I probably mispronounced it, but that's a real thing. And it's used, for example, when the great migrations occur in Africa, in the plains. And just before they start that migration, for several days, the animals get real out of control and attack one another, and all this energy is all pent up. And once they make the decision to start moving, to cross the stream and to deal with the alligators and start the migration, then everything settles down and they move, uniformly together. But that uneasiness that precedes that decision is called Zugenruha. And I think that's where we are as a human family right now on this planet. And so when you see industrial agriculture and Congress and all these other systems seem so unjust and so out of control, I'm choosing to think that's a good sign. I believe that they're so bizarre because they recognize it's the end and they're hanging on, like this, trying to save the old system. And I think it's a more obvious sign that it is collapsing. It's not working anymore. And the other thing I'd like to share with you, there's a really powerful writer, Margaret Wheatley. Meg Wheatley, does anyone know her work? Her first book, maybe the most important, was a book called Leadership in the New Science. And she uses chaos theory. She looks at all these processes, and she relied a lot on chaos theory to explore how communities come together with a belief and decision making. And one of the things she has said, which I've experienced myself, there is no power as great as a community that has decided what it believes in. And so as we as a human family decide that we want to create healthy communities, and that food is a part of that, and renewable energy is a part of that, and that different behaviors are part of that, and that it's not a matter of giving stuff up and living miserably, it's a matter of discovering what abundant living looks like. And we start sharing that, I don't think you can stop it. And I don't think the two brothers in Wichita can overpower it with big investments. And I don't think, corporate agriculture can stop it, because there's nothing as powerful as a human family deciding what we share in common and what we believe in. And so this is the time to make that happen.
Steve, Bob, Daniel, thank you very much for coming tonight. We really appreciate that.